Samburu Reserve, midday. An elephant cow stood at the edge of the ranger trail, her front leg planted but shaking. The dust clung to her flanks where the skin had dried in uneven ridges, and her ears fanned slowly in the heat. Behind her, a group of elephants waited at a distance, not moving forward, not grazing, not circling, just waiting. One young calf leaned slightly to one side, pressing its weight against the leg of another female. But the cow closest to the trail stood alone, separated by a narrow strip of packed soil, and did not blink. Kamari saw her before the jeep even rolled to a full stop. He had been driving slow, just beyond the acacia-cut line, checking the usual migration path along the inner bend of the Ewaso-Ngiro River. But this wasn't a path elephants took in daylight. Not toward a road. Not toward humans. Not this close. She wasn't just grazing nearby, she had come to the road itself. He stepped down and walked 20 paces before stopping. The air was dry. The wind still. The silence wasn't heavy but deliberate, as if the herd had agreed not to speak. Dust shifted around his boots as he crouched. The elephant didn't retreat. Her front left foot hovered just slightly, lifted for a moment, then pressed back into the dirt. She was hurt. Her skin showed a fine line of darker stain trailing from the upper joint of that front leg. Not fresh blood, just a sign of something lodged deep, something left too long. She swung her trunk toward the ground once, then tucked it close to her chin. Her eyes didn't narrow. They remained steady. Fixed, not fearful, not challenging. Just asking. Kamari had seen injured elephants before. Ones who stumbled from snares, others weakened by drought. But never this, never one who came forward and stopped, who made herself visible, who chose the road. He turned slowly, scanning the herd. No other movement. A few twitched ears. One younger male shifted his stance but didn't step forward. They were waiting, and not just for her. For him. He moved to the side and sat, lowering himself fully onto the edge of the path. The heat pressed through his shirt. Flies moved across the ground between them. Still she didn't shift. Her weight was barely balanced on 3 good legs, but she remained upright. If she runs, she falls, Kamari said softly. If she stays, maybe we help. From this distance, the edge of wire was now visible. Thin, rusted, curled halfway around the joint. It hadn't been freshly set, more likely a remnant of livestock fencing twisted into bushland. It had bitten slowly over time. The flesh around it was hard, raised. She had likely walked days with it, but she had brought herself here. Kamari reached into his side pack and took out the canvas water satchel. He set it down, then opened the clasp. The elephant did not flinch. The water dripped onto the dust. She shifted her trunk, lowered it toward the sound. She didn't drink, just inhaled, softly, then lifted her trunk again. The calf behind her took a few steps forward. A quiet rumble passed through the air, barely audible. Still, the others didn't move. Kamari exhaled through his nose and stood again. The cow didn't follow his movement. She stayed planted, leg trembling more now, chest rising a bit quicker. She had brought her herd to a human road, not to escape, but to be seen. There was no mistaking it. She had crossed the line of trust most elephants never do. And now, the next decision belonged to him. The risk was plain. If they approached too fast, she could panic. If they waited too long, the infection might spread. One wrong signal and the herd would flee, and she would collapse trying to follow. The cow didn't look away. She blinked once, then held still. Kamari raised the radio and called it in. Kamari didn't move forward right away. The radio call had gone through, but the response would take time. 40 minutes, maybe more, before the mobile vet unit reached the inner reserve. That left him alone, standing 20 feet from an injured matriarch who hadn't turned away. She was shifting now. Not in retreat, but out of strain. Her front left leg dragged slightly as she adjusted her stance, the full weight of her body momentarily supported by the others. Her trunk curled once near the sore limb, then dropped, resting in the dust. He took a slow step forward. Her ears lifted, but didn't spread. There was no mock charge, no bluff display, just a deep inhale and the soft, warning vibration of her breath. She wasn't unsure. She was exhausted. She was still. From this closer angle, the wound was plain. The wire had buried itself just above the joint, likely caught months ago and tightened slowly with movement. The skin around it had thickened, darkened. A crust of dried mud hid parts of it, but the line of swelling traced its full shape. There was no active bleeding, no infection smell, but the pressure it had exerted on the tendons was evident in her gait. If they moved her now, she might fall. If they left her too long, the wound might rot from inside. Kamari crouched and placed the open canvas satchel on the ground again, this time tipping it slightly so the water soaked into a shallow dip in the soil. The elephant turned her head slowly. Her trunk stretched out, touched the edge of the wet ground, then hovered above it. She sniffed, inhaled again, but didn't drink. Instead, she shifted her back foot. One careful movement to rebalance. Then, silence. The herd behind her remained frozen. No one stepped forward. A small calf blinked twice and leaned its head against a taller female's flank. They were waiting, but their postures were calm. There was no snorting, no alarm. Only stillness. Only the ache of a choice passed from her to the human in front of her. Kamari pulled the emergency tarp from his belt and unfolded it just enough to spread over the hot ground beside him. He sat again. Lower. Closer. His eyes didn't leave her wound. Her breath deepened once and a faint trail of dust lifted near her trunk. He spoke, not loudly, just enough to carry. "You're holding well, girl. Just hold a little longer." She blinked. Then, slowly, she lowered her head. Her trunk brushed the earth in a long, dragging line. She was not surrendering. She was showing him something older than fear, a kind of allowance. Kamari knew the signs. Elephants don't beg, they don't ask, but they do wait, and sometimes they permit. Another tremor ran through the damaged leg, a small shake. Then she adjusted her weight again, but this time more of it remained on the sore side. A decision made visible. She wasn't preparing to flee. She was enduring. At this distance, the pain was obvious. Each time she moved, the wire pulled deeper into the tissue. There would be tendon damage, possibly nerve loss. If it wasn't treated soon, infection would spread along the bone. And if they miscalculated the sedative dose or moved too abruptly, her size could work against her. She might panic, or worse, she might collapse and not rise. He looked again toward the horizon. No dust trail yet, no sign of the vet truck. The elephant lowered her trunk once more, this time brushing it across her own foot. Not a swat, not irritation, just contact. Then she stopped moving entirely. Kamari didn't speak again. He simply waited, watching the wind ripple faint lines in the dry grass behind her, watching her stand still. 3 legs bearing the weight of a matriarch's choice, and all around them the air held still, as if the land itself understood what had just been offered. Kamari rose slowly from the tarp, brushing dust from the back of his wrist. The elephant cow had not moved. Her trunk now rested loosely along the curve of her good leg, eyes lowered, not closed. A faint gust stirred the grass beyond her, and that's when he noticed the shift. A soundless adjustment across the herd. Not a retreat, not an alarm, but a reformation, as if a signal had passed between them. The outer line curved gently, each elephant turning by degrees. What had been a scattered watch became a wide crescent, a loose semicircle that faced inward toward her. He stepped forward slowly, 5 paces, then 6. The nearest adult in the ark lifted its head, ears half-fanned, but did not move. Kamari stopped again, scanning the space between them, and that's when the smaller figure appeared. A young calf stepped into view from behind the ark, no taller than his shoulder, moving from the cover of 2 bodies. Its right front foot dragged, not fully but enough to catch the dust. It hesitated, then walked on, slower than normal, favoring its opposite side. Each step landed with a faint limp, unspoken but clear. The calf's skin bore no signs of a snare, no fresh injury, just an uneven gait, the kind that came from strain, or mimicry, or something deeper. Kamari watched as the calf crossed behind the cow and stopped beside her. It didn't lean in, it didn't cry. It simply stood. She didn't turn toward it, but her trunk lifted once and brushed the calf's back, light, brief, enough to be felt, but not held. The space between them and the human was now marked. The herd had arranged it with quiet precision. A wide opening had been left behind the cow, just enough for access, a deliberate gap in the circle. If help came, it would have to pass through there, and the herd was showing no sign of closing it. This was not a defensive wall. It was a boundary of trust, not complete, but growing. Kamari lowered to one knee again, letting the minutes pass. The sun had started to dip slightly behind the far ridge, casting shadows that stretched toward the center of the circle. A distant call echoed from the western hills. Birds, high-pitched and dry. Still, the elephants remained silent. The calf adjusted its stance once, lifting the sore leg quickly before lowering it again. No vocalizations, no distress, but a message was forming. As clear as any cry, the matriarch had come forward with her own wound, and now the calf had followed. 2 injuries, carried in parallel, both revealed. One visible, the other silent. Both placed in the open. If they retreated now, the herd might move on, and the chance to treat either injury would vanish. If they acted too soon, the trust could fracture. The risk remained. Any sudden movement could break what little had been offered. A soft exhale escaped the matriarch's chest. Her eyes opened slightly wider, then narrowed again. Not in fear, just the kind of blink animals make when weighing their own stillness against the noise of humans. Kamari didn't reach for the radio this time. Not yet. He simply let the moment breathe. The calf shifted once more, then took one careful step toward the open space. It wasn't fleeing. It was making room. And just beyond, the wind lifted a dry curl of bark and carried it across the line between them. Weightless, slow, and completely unchallenged. Kamari didn't rise right away. The calf had paused in the open gap, one leg held just slightly off the ground, its trunk curled loosely beneath its chin. A breeze moved along the edge of the plain, soft but steady, enough to rustle the tops of the tall grass behind the herd. There was no sound from the elephants. No deep rumble, no snort, just stillness. A silence that felt held in place by choice, not fear. He stepped forward only once, then again, slow, measured. His boots made no sound on the hard earth. The cow lifted her head but didn't widen her ears. Her trunk shifted, brushing gently against the inner curve of her bad leg. It was not a threat, just contact. Kamari stopped less than 5 meters away, closer than any ranger should stand without protection, but she allowed it. The wire around her leg was visible now in full, tight and deep, wrapped in a dull rusted loop just above the ankle joint. The skin had begun to cave around it. Infection had not spread yet, but there was no time left to wait. One rain, one misstep, one run, and it would split. He knelt slowly and unscrewed the cap from the steel canteen. The water was lukewarm. He poured it into a shallow dent in the dirt, careful not to splash. then set the bottle beside it and leaned back. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The cow lowered her trunk slowly. She paused once, sensing the change in the air, the foreign scent, the trace of metal, then dipped into the water. Her trunk curled slightly and she drew up a small stream. Not quickly, just once. Then again. Behind her, the calf stepped forward, one slow, deliberate pace at a time. It paused near her back leg, then came beside her. It, too, lowered its trunk and touched the edge of the water. No panic, no flinch, no resistance. Kamari exhaled through his nose and reached for the radio at his hip. His voice was low, even, almost a whisper beneath the quiet. She's permitting. Full approach allowed. Wound visible, moderate swelling, limited movement, calf present. No herd aggression, send vet team now. He didn't elaborate, there was no need. The tone of the call told them everything. She had made the decision. Now it was on them not to betray it. The wind moved through again, lifting a small ring of ash and dust across the plain. It skirted the edge of the semicircle, then settled. Still no shift from the herd. Their trust had not faltered. Kamari remained crouched, his palms flat on his knees. He did not reach out, did not adjust his position. The cow took another slow sip from the shallow puddle, then gently nudged the calf back a step with the side of her trunk. It obeyed without resistance, curling its ears and resting its weight unevenly on 3 legs. If he touched her, she might react. If he stepped closer, she might move away. But she had given him something far more valuable than proximity. She had offered presence, complete and unbroken. What was at risk now had shifted. It was no longer just about infection or mobility. If they broke her trust during the treatment, the herd might never allow contact again. The matriarch was the gatekeeper. Every future rescue in this region might hinge on what happened next. A low hum began in the east, faint, distant. The vet vehicle was coming. Dust would rise, noise would follow. They would have to work fast, but quiet. The moment of calm was finite. Kamari pressed his hand once into the earth beside him, then looked up. The elephant blinked. Once. Then returned to drinking, slow as before. And as the sky dimmed slightly behind the far ridge, the calf leaned into her side, not from fear, but from memory. The vehicle crested the far ridge at a controlled crawl, tires pressing softly into the hardened soil. No sirens, no sudden gear shifts, just the slow hum of approach beneath a muted late-afternoon sky. Kamari stood as it neared, raising one hand, then lowering it with the same calm weight he had used all day. He didn't glance toward the elephants. He didn't need to. They had already seen it coming. The vet team moved quickly but with care. One stepped down first, a tall woman named Lorna carrying a tranquilizer gun across her back and a soft-case medical pack in her left hand. She paused when her boots touched the ground, scanning the semicircle with practiced eyes. Kamari pointed once. No words. The matriarch stood precisely where she had been, one foot slightly behind the other, trunk hanging low but steady. The herd had not broken its shape. Lorna motioned to the driver, who turned off the engine. Another stepped out with the cold kit and sedative vial. The air was holding its breath. Not a single elephant had moved. Kamari whispered, just once, not toward anyone in particular. Still holding. We don't get a second chance. Lorna nodded and moved to position, slow as smoke curling through still air. She didn't raise the gun quickly. She didn't rush to aim. Every motion was curved, quiet, deliberate. The wind shifted once, gently leftward. She adjusted her stance. The dart struck with a sound no louder than a twig snapping. The matriarch flinched, a sharp flick of the shoulder, then stilled again. Her ears pressed back briefly, then relaxed. The calf took one step closer but didn't cry out. The rest of the herd didn't retreat. Not a foot moved. They had heard worse, seen worse. Their silence was not confusion. It was memory and decision. The sedative would take effect slowly, 5 minutes, maybe 7. Kamari watched her body carefully for the first signs. The dip of her head, the deeper draw of breath, the shifting weight in her hindquarters. Lorna knelt and prepared the injection tools, wrapping each in soft cloth to muffle sound. Every small act was soaked in patience. The cow exhaled, a sound like gravel pushing through a hollowed gourd. Then her trunk curled once beneath her, and she shifted her right foot to brace. Kamari stepped forward, 4 meters now. He raised both hands and held them outward, not as command, but as presence. The herd adjusted only slightly. One older male turned his shoulder inward, half blocking the calf from view. Still, no charge came. No trumpet, no foot stomp. What was at risk remained unchanged. If she dropped too fast, she could collapse against her wounded leg. If the dart failed and she ran, the wire could sever muscle with a single burst of weight. If the herd misread any movement, they could turn on the humans. And the next time trust was needed, it would not come. Lorna motioned with 2 fingers. Kamari nodded. The cow's eyes had softened. Her head was lowering in degrees. Her trunk touched the dirt again, then coiled and rested. She swayed once, then settled to her knees, not crashing, not struggling, just down, with quiet control. The herd held. Lorna approached, crouched low, and placed one hand lightly on the edge of the cow's flank. The calf let out a sound. Low, not panicked. A questioning hum. Kamari took 1 step to the side, allowing her space. The team moved in together, placing pads beneath the limb, lifting gently to expose the wound. It was worse than expected. The wire had grown into the skin, pressing between folds of thick muscle. But the bleeding was dry. She had endured it a long time. One vet whispered, "She's stronger than she looks." Kamari said nothing. He watched the herd, still silent, still waiting. And just beyond them, the grass shifted with the wind, slow and even, as if the plains themselves had agreed to stay. Lorna pressed 2 fingers gently to the edge of the cow's eye. No movement, no resistance. The sedation had taken full effect. Her chest rose slowly, rhythmic, with the labored breath of something long burdened. The leg was now fully exposed, lifted onto padded cloth and braced with a soft strap beneath the tendon. One of the junior vets had already cleaned the outer surface, brushing away caked mud and loose skin. But what lay underneath was worse than any of them had expected. The wire had cut a near-perfect ring through the upper fold of skin, embedded so deep in places it had disappeared from view. The team worked quietly, no need for words, their movements practiced but deliberate. Kamari stood back, hands still, eyes fixed on the task. One misstep here, one slip of a scalpel or delay in cleaning, and she might not walk again. Lorna peeled away a final layer of dead tissue with the tip of a hooked probe. That's when she saw it. Buried just behind the joint, surrounded by fibrous flesh and blackened tissue, was the edge of something not made by hand. A small, rusted shape, sharp at one end, flattened at the other. She signaled silently, and the others paused. With slow precision, she pulled the object free. A bullet fragment. Old, corroded, laced with wire. No one said anything. There was no outrage, no whispered disbelief, only a shared silence. It explained the swelling. The wire had likely been tied by someone who hadn't meant to trap an elephant. But the bullet, that had come earlier. It had lodged beneath the skin and stayed, hidden until pressure and movement drew it to the surface. The body had tried to reject it, but there had been no relief. Kamari stepped forward. Lorna held it out, the fragment resting in her gloved palm. He nodded once. That should not have been in her. Then he stepped back. The cleaning resumed without pause. The risk now was infection. The flesh around the wound had already begun to discolor, shades of purple, dark yellow, even pale green near the deepest point. Lorna flushed the cavity twice, then a third time with antiseptic. The calf circled behind them once, stopping near the cow's front leg. Its breathing had changed, deeper now, as if sensing the shift in her state. One assistant prepared the injectable antibiotics while another sutured the inner layer of muscle. They wouldn't close the full wound. It needed to breathe. But the blood had slowed. The cleaning was working, and the leg was still warm. If they had found her a day later, or if she had run instead of staying, the outcome would have changed. Nerve death would have followed, then collapse. She would have been trampled in her own attempt to keep up. But now she had a chance. They packed the outer wound with medicated gauze and covered it with a flexible wrap that could hold through the first few days. It would still be fragile. The dressing might not survive a full stamp or creek crossing. But she would stand. As the sun shifted lower in the sky, casting long gold across the flat of the plain, Lorna placed the bullet fragment into a small cloth pouch and tied it shut. "Keep that," she said quietly. "Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they remember." No one replied. The wind carried the scent of iodine across the dry soil. Behind them, the herd shifted again, a long, silent arc of breath and muscle holding its shape with quiet, waiting presence. And beneath them, the sleeping matriarch took in one long, slow breath and let it go. 3 days later, the light settled low across the reserve, a soft, dull bronze washing over the trail's edge. The heat had thinned since morning, but the air still clung warm to the ground, holding the scent of iron-rich dust and old water. Kamari walked alone, his boots pressing into earth that remembered weight, not fresh tracks, not blown clean. Just settled, wide impressions that had not yet faded. There were no elephants in sight, no sound of movement, no rumble carried on the wind. The plain ahead lay still, the grasses bent from the eastern breeze, undisturbed. He passed the edge of the clearing where the herd had once formed their silent arc. The circle was gone now, but the memory remained, marked into the soil by what they'd left behind. 12 prints, each one distinct. 4 adults, likely females, had stood furthest back. Large, round, nearly symmetrical, spaced with the steady rhythm of watchful stillness. 2 calves had walked through the center, side by side, leaving smaller crescents with sharper edges. Others overlapped faintly near the spot where the matriarch had gone down. One print was deeper than the rest, pressed into the dirt so firmly it had cracked slightly around the heel. That one had been hers. The moment she rose again, he knelt beside it, fingertips grazing the edge. The dragline curved nearby, a shallow arc left by the wound dressing as it brushed against the earth when she first stepped forward. The wrap would have loosened by now, likely torn or shed, but it had held long enough to keep the wound clean during the rise. That had been all they could ask for. A few meters ahead, near the shaded base of an acacia, the smallest detail waited. A single oval, smooth-edged, resting at the exact spot where his supply bag had been. It hadn't been made by feet, not by struggle or weight. It was the shape left behind by a trunk, laid flat without pressure beside his things. Not a gesture of thanks, just acknowledgement. If she had come closer, he would have seen her. If he'd been here when they moved on, he might have watched her take the first steps with full weight on the healing leg. But that moment wasn't his to keep. They had chosen their time to leave, on their own terms. Kamari stood and let the silence settle again. What remained was not a scene. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, clean, a space made still by the absence of need. There was no guarantee she would survive the next season, no certainty the wound wouldn't open again during migration or strain. But for now, the herd had moved on, together, and she had walked. He turned once more, took a final step back across the flattened edge of the trail and looked out across the plain. The grasses rippled in long waves. One gust passed through low and slow, bending stalks and lifting dry seed. Beyond the ridge where the light dipped, no shadows moved, but the trail was clear. They had passed here, and they had left no fear behind.